27, Tuesday, February 23rd, a lot to cover. Yesterday we saw President Joe Biden commemorate over 500,000 of our fellow Americans who have perished from COVID-19. It didn't have to be this bad. We know this. There's no time for politics and massive death, but the facts are the facts. Donald Trump lied to the American people about COVID. He mocked people for wearing masks and then held super spreader events, which helped transmit the virus. So there's no doubt it did not have to be this bad. But regarding the actual people lost, I hope people remember these 500,000 plus of our fellow Americans. They're not numbers. They're somebody's loved one. They're someone's apple of their eye. They're a brother, a sister, a beloved uncle, a grandparent, a friend. I lost several people I knew, including a childhood friend. And now, that childhood friend's two sons have no father. So this has been very painful. And now we see light at the end of the tunnel a little bit with the vaccines. And the good news is the vaccines in America and around the world are being distributed, and I think robustly in certain cases. But in reality, we are seeing similarly, like we saw with COVID and the impact of it on people of color and minorities, the same thing with the vaccine not going to the people who suffer the most from COVID, namely the minorities. And this is not just happening in the U.S. My family's Palestinian. In my point, this is kind of emblematic of minority communities in the U.S. or in even other places like Palestine. So from Philadelphia to Palestine, we're seeing the same thing. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, the Philadelphia City Council raised concerns that at the point white people were getting vaccinated 3 times the number of black residents. 3 times black residents, that's way off the charts. Now, you can argue why, different reasons, but that's not the exception. That's the rule around this country at varying degrees, that white people are being overrepresented in terms of vaccinations, and black and brown people way underrepresented. And in fact, as we know, black and brown people are the ones who suffered with their lives, often working on frontline jobs, and also economically. We've seen the exact same thing with my Palestinian family, and that it's been a challenging reality. Now, my family's in the West Bank, so it's clear here. Within Israel, the Israeli government is doing a robust job in giving out vaccinations to people who live in Israel, including Arabs, Israeli Arabs known as Palestinians, and even permanent residents in East Jerusalem. They're vaccinating them. But even as the progressive Jewish publication, The Forward, documented last week, of the people vaccinated so far, nearly 50% were Jewish Israelis to the 23% of Arab Israelis. So you see this big disparity. It's not far different from here in America. The point is, privilege gives you benefits. In America, in the Middle East, in Europe, in that the privileged class gets the benefits while the minorities struggle. And I wanted to take a moment to talk about the situation with my family and other Palestinians, because it doesn't get much media coverage, sadly enough. That my family lives in the West Bank, outside of Bethlehem. And the reality is their freedom of movement, and frankly, their freedom to dream, is limited by the Netanyahu administration. Internally, there are checkpoints, but even externally, where they're going to travel can be affected depending on the policies at the time of the Netanyahu administration. Not that my cousins did something wrong, that's different. Do something wrong, you pay a price. Collectively, they will suffer a penalty of their things, high terror alerts and the like. But just, this is part of life. In Gaza, I have no family there, but Gaza, everything going in and out is controlled by the Israeli government and the Egyptian government, and including COVID. So COVID vaccines, not the disease, obviously, but the COVID vaccines going in and out. So this is the situation we have. We have the COVID pandemic, according to UN human rights experts. The COVID pandemic has been ravaging the West Bank and Gaza in recent months. Their exact words: it is a fractured and already badly under-resourced Palestinian healthcare system. And just to remind people, under Donald Trump, he cut aid to the Palestinians, hundreds of millions of dollars in aid that we gave each year to the Palestinian refugees to help them. Now Joe Biden has returned that aid, but it's going to take a while to get to them. So at least we have Joe Biden going the right direction there. And just like in the U.S., where the mortality rate is higher for people of color than white people, same thing with the Palestinians. In Israel, the mortality rate from COVID is 0.7%. For Palestinians in the West Bank, it's 1.1%. So you're talking about almost a 40% higher mortality rate from COVID. And again, that has to do with a system within Israel that is better funded, more robust, while the Palestinians, a minority marginalized community, has less. And again, part of that is the U.S. cutting off aid to the UN Relief Works Agency that helps the Palestinians there. So there's so many articles in the last week or two about the vaccines going on, the distribution in the U.S. and the disparity, and in the Middle East. I will say this, the situation in the West Bank's even more, I'd say, infuriating in one way, that there are hundreds of thousands of settlers who live in the West Bank, Israeli settlers, in violation of international law, although at this point, it doesn't seem like anybody cares anymore, to be blunt with you. But they are getting vaccinated, but the Palestinians, the indigenous people who live literally next door, are not getting vaccinated. So this literally means the settlers who stole my grandmother's land, and they stole my grandmother's land, that's not inflammatory, those are the facts. They stole my grandmother's land because she was the wrong religion in the wrong place. They took it and turned it into a settlement decades ago. Well, they're vaccinated, but my cousins who are just walking distance away in the West Bank are not vaccinated. And there's a debate where, the Israeli government says we have no obligation to vaccinate the Palestinian people. It's under an agreement called the Oslo Accord in 1993, which Israel has violated nonstop, especially with settlement building. There's no more egregious example of that. But what international law, according to experts from the UN, to Human Rights Watch, Israel, as the occupying power, is supposed to be the one inoculating and immunizing the people under their control. So, in the last few weeks, there's been some articles about this. Now Israel, a little bit because of being shamed in the media, has stepped up inoculating Palestinians who work within Israel. It's trickling to the West Bank and Gaza. Gaza, I'm not even sure. I can't even find where they're getting their immunization or not, and it's being permitted to go through. The West Bank, the Palestinians there have bought more. It's coming to them. But it's exactly the same as the U.S. It takes the media's glare to get things done. Because when the media in the U.S. talked about the impact of COVID on black and brown people and how horrifically amoral it was, then things a little bit changed. Same with the vaccine now. It's being called out and changing again. That's the hope as well in the Middle East. And because it shows the media can play a good role every now and then, so the Palestinians are getting a little bit more aid. But if it wasn't for the media coverage, I don't know if it would happen. I don't think the Netanyahu administration, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, who has said there will not be a Palestinian watch on his state, there will not be a Palestinian state on his watch. There's no sense of humanity in the way he views Palestinian Christians and Muslims. That's just the reality of the world we live in terms of the people in the West Bank and Gaza. Although I will tell you this, I have a great solution for Netanyahu administration. You want to make sure you have no obligation to the Palestinian people whatsoever for immunization? Here's the thing. Give them their freedom. Let them have self-determination. Let the Palestinian Christians and Muslims there have self-determination just like the Israelis do. And you can have states side by side. And you can have, hopefully in time, peace and commerce between the two people, and things flourish and do great. But that's the easiest answer for Netanyahu. It's not going to happen. Again, Netanyahu's made it very clear over and over, and our media in the U.S. barely covers it, running for re-election several times, making clear there will never be a Palestinian state on his watch. So that means my family and other Palestinians are born into occupation, will live their entire lives under an occupation where they have limited control over their own lives, and will die under occupation as it continues on now. That's the reality. So we'll talk about this more on my show today, about the disparity between privileged and people of color, or in the case of the Palestinians, people who are marginalized in minority communities. And the struggle for equality transcends our borders, my friend. So I hope you tune in my shows live 6 to 9 p.m. on channel 127 on Sirius XM. If you don't subscribe, go check it out. It's on the free trials on the website. Join the conversation. Call in. We got a lot of work to do. If you want progress, stay active. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's preview of the Dino